So far, it has been assumed that the utilitarian is making a decision within the context of a society that is going to remain capitalist. But suppose the utilitarian entertained a more radical solution. Suppose that the resolution of the conflict involved a transition from a society based on the capitalist principle to one in which the utilitarian principle were given free play. In a society based on the utilitarian principle, everyone would be engaged in activity designed to maximize pleasure and minimize pain, and there would be no point in producing goods or services that were inconsistent with that policy. It would then be possible to avoid a painful gap between what people want and what maximizes their happiness, and this would be done by arranging for there to be reliable information on all important matters. So, for example, if a certain kind of food were carcinogenic, then this would be publicized in media which were known to be as reliable as chemistry or mathematics journals are in this society. But what exactly is utilitarianism? From Google, we have the doctrine that actions are right if they are useful or for the benefit of a majority. The doctrine that an action is right insofar as it promotes happiness, and that the greatest happiness of the greatest number should be the guiding principle of conduct. Definitely a good effort to define such an obscurified and overcomplicated philosophy. However, it is better to think of utilitarianism as the doctrine to act in accordance with the utilitarian principle, which is to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. Many accredit the utilitarian principle to J.S Mill. Although not responsible for the conception of utilitarianism, he ought to be accredited with its popularity as well as its problems. The version of utilitarianism he published was strategically gutted, obscurified, and overcomplicated. Mill separated his explanation of utilitarianism into 5 different sections: general remarks, what utilitarianism is, of the ultimate sanction of the principle of utility, of what sort of proof the principle of utility is susceptible, and of the connection between justice and utility. In the general remarks portion of his essay, he speaks how next to no progress has been made when it comes to judging what is right and what is wrong of morality, and if there is such a thing as moral instinct, which he argues that there may not be. However, he agrees that in general, our moral faculty, according to all those of its interpreters who are entitled to the name of thinkers, supplies us only with general principles of moral judgments. In the second chapter of his essay, he focuses no longer on the background information, but utilitarianism itself. He quotes utilitarianism as the greatest happiness principle, and defines this theory by saying that pleasure and no pain are the only inherently good things in the world, and expands on it by saying that actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness, and wrong as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness. By happiness is intended pleasure and the absence of pain, and by unhappiness, retrospectively, pain and the privation of pleasure. To make a long story short, Mill wrote a book that sabotages utilitarianism because in 19th century Britain there was a utilitarian movement which aimed to organize society on the basis of the utilitarian principle. He accomplished the sabotage by arguing that money is equivalent to pleasure, and by arguing that the average person need be only concerned about himself and a few other people in order that the general interest be served. The confusions he encourages are gross, but they appeal to people looking for an excuse to knuckle under to the powers that already existed. In large-scale utilitarian society, the research program would be geared to discovering the means to use to maximize pleasure and minimize pain, and at every level of the social organization, people would devise and carry out plans based on the results of the research, like direct democracy. On a small scale, we can see something like this in action, such as in gardening associations, in which people function as equals, share and apply knowledge, and etc. Better than the utilitarian principle, though, is the classical socialist principle, which advocates maximal realization of the totality of our innate desires, not just our desire for pleasure in the absence of pain. A person who lacked the capacity for pleasure would not be better off dead. There was, of course, also a classical socialist movement, and it was sabotaged in essentially the same way as Mill sabotaged utilitarianism, leaving us with the welfarism of social democracy.